Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another LookUp education series. Sorry if I can get that out. So grateful that you can join us for yet another month. And we are entering such an important season for us to be engaged in a conversation about mental health. And today's topic is so critical, so necessary, especially for those of us that are influencers and people that can help those that are struggling during this season. My name's Clinton Foppel, and I'm remedylive, and I'm really thankful to be able to host you yet again here from our studio. But because of the season we're in and the increasing COVID cases, we are going to be doing today a little bit different than we've done in the past, and I do apologize. I wish that we could have all of our guests here in the studio. That would be what I would desire, but we also want to make sure that we're safe, and so all of our guests are going to be joining us today via Zoom, and I just want to make sure that you're aware that we're still going to have that polling interaction. So as you look at your screen, you should be noticing a "How are you?" question that we are pushing to the screen right now, and it looks like right now we're looking at a 6.89. So we are grateful that you are doing better than you're doing worse. But as you know, around here at Remedy Live, we're committed to asking the question, how are you really? Because we truly want to know. We know that this is a time in our human history where we've got to be honest about those things that we are struggling with. And so we're so grateful for the opportunity to engage you today in this important topic. I also want to remind you that we have a number of things that we want to make sure you're aware of here at Remedy Live. And the thing that we're most proud of is the way that we're creating programs that talk about mental health. And the Wired Experience is one of those events that we're very passionate about making sure that we offer at no charge to our partners. And so if you are a church leader or you lead a business or you have an organization and you'd like to work with us to bring a free interactive experience your way, we'd love to bring the Wired Experience your way. Simply visit remedylive.com/wired and get us a chance to be able to partner with you to help your people talk about this important topic of mental health. Well, today we again are blessed to be able to do this because of the incredible support of the Lutheran Foundation and my dear friend Dennis Goff. So Dennis, how are you? I know we're joining us via Zoom today, but how are you? And tell us a little bit about today's topic.
Clinton, thank you a lot for once again for doing this with us. This has been a great partnership with you and Remedy Live to bring about these webinars, this series over the last number of months. Today's topic is substance use in a global pandemic, how the faith community can help. And we just thought that it would be good to have a conversation about this topic this time of the year, especially in light of the pandemic and the impact and the increase of substance use because of the how people have been affected by the pandemic. I'm really excited to have the panel together that we do, the number of people that can speak into this topic today. So thanks again, Clinton and Remedy Live for doing this with us. I want to introduce the people that will be a part of today's discussion and presentation. Rachel Blakeman is the director of the Purdue University Fort Wayne Community Research Institute, and she's also the project manager for the Hope and Recovery Team, referred to as HEART, a grant that was received, and she's managing that, and she will also kind of moderate this discussion today. I really appreciate all the work that Rachel does, especially on behalf of the Lutheran Foundation. Also a part of that HEART team is Bethany Harper. She's the Intervention Services Manager at Lutheran Social Services of Indiana. She's a licensed mental health counselor and in her counselor role serves on that HEART team. We have Jeremy Ormiston. He's Vice and Narcotics Detective with the Fort Wayne Police Department. He's the one of two HEART officers doing follow-up visits with people who have experienced an overdose in Allen County. Jeremy, we really appreciate what you do in this community and as a part of that HEART network as well. And then also we have Nathan Widener, who is vicar at St. Peter's Lutheran Church and School here in Fort Wayne. Nathan has an experience as an addictions counselor prior to going to Concordia Theological Seminary, where he's a student there prior to his going into the ministry. So I really appreciate, Nate, what you'll bring to the conversation from your background and experience. So because of the season that we're in, because of increase in overdoses and drug use, Rachel, this is a timely topic for us. So thank you for directing us and leading us into this.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm pleased to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the good work that is happening with the Lutheran Foundation and our Heart team, and then also have the opportunity to connect this with the audience that we have here. So one of the reasons that we're covering this topic today is in the last 6 to 8 months during the pandemic, we've seen a substantial increase or significant increase in substance use in our community. And so I'm going to have Clinton put up a question here on the polling. We want to understand from those who are watching this webinar right now, how this is affecting people in their life. So we're looking at it, members of the church, family, loved ones, coworkers. Also, it's okay if you don't know a lot today. We want you to come away with more information than you started with. So if you're feeling like this is something you're not familiar with, that's okay too. So what I want to do though is, while we're waiting for the answers to come in, I want to start with Jeremy and to say, why are we seeing these increases happening right now? What do you know from the Fort Wayne Police Department and the work you're doing with the Heart team?
Well, I can tell you that, it's really kind of been going the last couple of years now. We are seeing an increase in opiate use, especially fentanyl. We have actually the area is getting riddled with these fake M90 or M30 pills. They look like a prescription pill, but probably 95% of the ones that we've run into, really even 100%, are counterfeit. They're filled full of, garbage and fentanyl, and they don't even actually include any kind of medication that you would find in a real M30 pill. We were still seeing lots of methamphetamine use, cocaine, spice, and marijuana's always seem to be big as well.
Yeah, let's talk also about what you're seeing on fatal and non-fatal overdoses.
We have seen an increase in fatal overdoses and non-fatal. I think this year we might actually break our record, unfortunately. When it comes to, I think, the pandemic probably does play a lot with going on. People out of work or being stuck at home, or, things like that. That seems to be maybe an issue. And I honestly think that we'll probably get worse as the winter goes. People seem to enclose themselves in, and when they actually have those overdoses, they're not out in a park or whatever. So they may not be discovered. I mean, that was kind of the problem that we saw last year when everyone was cooped up in their house, was that people would kind of go into an overdose setting and not even be maybe found right away, which causes big problems for our fatal overdoses.
Yeah, and then what about also that you're seeing, Jeremy, in terms of patterns of use? Are people using one drug? Are they using many drugs? What are we seeing on that front?
For the most part, when we talk to clients, and I am with the police department, so during the course of talking to people who've been arrested, most people will have their choice of the illegal drug to take, but many will also tell you that whatever I can get my hands on. I prefer fentanyl or I prefer heroin, but I'm not going to pass up meth if I can get my hands on it.
So what we're seeing then is really just a lot of what we call polysubstance use, multiple substances. So it's not, we're seeing, so those who are in active use may be using multiple drugs. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. I mean, if they do have a preference of stuff that they would rather have, but again, if all they can get is methamphetamine until they can get some fentanyl or whatever they can find next, that's what they'll go with to get them through that day or that hour.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. Now, Bethany, let's turn to you as a clinician. What are you seeing with your clients as a result of the pandemic?
I'm definitely seeing a lot of increased levels of depression, anxiety, stress, kind of with all of that, especially with the stress and the anxiety, difficulty sleeping, difficulty eating. We have seen that it is easy to hide relapses because of isolation. And so not even being aware that someone has relapsed. And that has been one of the biggest struggles that I have seen. I think the other big problem is that our clients don't have as much recovery capital. And recovery capital is the total number of resources someone has to really help them in the recovery. And so what the pandemic has done is that it has caused people to lose their jobs or lose hours on their jobs. So financially, there's been a lot of struggles. People facing evictions, getting gas and stuff like that shut off. There was a time where they couldn't evict, but now, stuff like that has ended. And so some of our people are really struggling. Earlier in the pandemic, when transitional homes and shelters were on lockdowns themselves, they weren't accepting new clients. And that was one of the biggest struggles was, when someone wanted to get clean or when someone was homeless, where do we go? How do we help them? That was horrific. That was so hard. And then the people who were part of transitional houses, I saw an increase in irritability, being on lockdown with a bunch of other people. They just, some people really struggled with that, and feeling like I have zero control, not only over this pandemic, but now I can't go out. I can't leave. I can't do any of this. And so that was an additional stressor as well that I saw.
Excellent. And so when we're taking a look at this, I'm looking at the results here from our poll. So thank you for everyone who's been responding. We have almost half are just not aware about how this is affecting people in their lives. So hopefully we're going to give you some insight on that. What we're seeing, 35% are saying members of their church, 29% at family and loved ones, 12% with coworkers, and then 24% are saying other. I always think I should ask what the other is because I always see that question, but thank you so much for that. We can get some good insight to that. So now we're going to switch over to another polling question to consider how we view substance use disorder or addiction. And so what we're going to ask about this is, Clinton's going to bring that up. And so we're talking about the misuse of substances. We're talking alcohol, opioids, stimulants. And so the question is, do you see this as a disease, or is this a moral failure for the person, or are you not sure? So Dennis, while we're waiting for those results to come in, let's talk about why we're talking about this in the context of the Lutheran Foundation.
Yeah, one of the focuses of the Lutheran Foundation over the last number of years has been a strategic direction on mental and behavioral health and wellness. The foundation did some research several years ago to really see where there's some major gaps of services in the area, gaps of funding. And this is one of the areas that really lifted up. And our board decided that they wanted to give strategic attention to mental wellness and especially to reduce the stigma of mental illness. And so to see the Lutheran Foundation as a collaborative agency, doing advocacy work, providing resources for our community. Some of the early surveys that we did when we first started talking about this, people revealed that they didn't really know where to go for services, and or there was limited access for services, and that led to the creation of the LookUp Indiana website, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Excellent.
But yeah. So this has just really been a passionate, strategic focus for the Lutheran Foundation over the last several years and into the future.
Well, so we're looking at our results coming in, and so far we've got the vast majority of our attendees today are identifying that they believe that the misuse of substances, substance use disorder, is a disease. And we've got 21% who aren't sure. Nobody has identified it as a moral failure. It's okay if you do. We're here to ask, how are you doing really? What do you really think about this? So while we're waiting for those final results to come in, I'm going to look to Nate and Bethany to ask us to talk about the difference between a moral failure and a disease, and how does that fit into this picture?
And I think that's a really great question, because I think that even if the people on our webinar today are kind of, skewing toward the idea that it is a disease model, there are a lot of people out there that don't regard it that way. There are a lot of people that think of addiction as being something related to a moral failure. And so if we were going to take a look at what it means to be, or what moral failure means, we might say something that usually focuses on decision making and assumes that whatever problems a person is facing is due to a series of irresponsible choices that can simply be reversed. So a lot of folks, whenever they regard this aspect or this thought about what a moral failure is, they think it's something that somebody can just stop doing. That if they wanted to, they could just go back in time, analyze the decisions that they made along the way, and then choose to reverse some of those and go back to being normal. But whenever we start thinking about what the disease model is, I think it's important that we kind of take a look at what that looks like. And then I'll pass it off to Bethany to tell us a little bit more about the science. Imagine this. Imagine if there was no other way for you to feel happy or satisfied than to use drugs or alcohol. And I'm going to use kind of a biblical phrase here. What if you were in a place where you're in your life where the food in your mouth turned to ashes and all of your relationships didn't feel like you were connecting? You were just kind of in that gray area where life had no real joy for you. And what if the only way for you to feel good, the only way, was to use alcohol and drugs? And that's really kind of the underpinning for the disease model, because the disease model will tell you why that is actually the way it is, because we know that it's a medical condition. And to talk more about that, I think Bethany's going to fill us in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know studies show that addiction is 50% due to genetic predisposition. And so the moral model doesn't take that into account. The moral model of addiction says that it is because of poor choices you have made, lack of willpower that you have, and an unwillingness to change your life that continues the addiction. As a counselor, I have seen people with plenty of willpower and wanting to change and making really good choices who have a lapse, who slip. And it's not that they are morally wrong. I think the big thing is too, if we look at something as someone as being wrong or immoral because of an addiction, you know, that exasperates this thing of called shame. And shame is I am something wrong. I don't want anyone to feel like that. Guilt, I did something wrong. That's disease model. So the disease model is very closely linked to a biopsychosocial model, which takes into account the biological. So that's saying that 50%, that 50% of addiction is due to genetic predisposition. We also know that the children of people who have addictions are 8 times more likely to develop an addiction themselves. So those are things that are outside of their control. The disease model also looks at the psychological issues. So a lot of times there are comorbid, co-occurring disorders. So substance use depression, substance use PTSD. They tend to go a lot hand in hand. And then the social aspects, who are you surrounding yourselves with? Are they positive or negative influences? Are you living in a place that is conducive to recovery, or that's keeping you in this cycle of addiction? What's kind of cool lately is that a fourth component of the biopsychosocial model is emerging, and that's the spiritual. And that is because the spiritual does play such a positive, great role in someone's recovery. And so, yeah, that's what the model I focus on is this disease biopsychosocial model. I also try to think of to like, if someone has heart disease, it's partly due to genes, but it's partly due to lifestyle choices. So we don't look at someone who has heart disease and we don't say to them, you are a bad person. We say, what can we do to fix it? And that's how we need to start looking at addiction. You are not a bad person because you are addicted to meth or fentanyl. What can we do to help you? What can we do to fix it?
And I think just to add to that, you know, there is this, as part of this dynamic between the moral failure and the idea of the disease model, is that you see that it's much more complex when we talk about this as a disease. And so the recovery for people in this condition can be quite lengthy. And so oftentimes whenever we talk about a moral failure, we think about it as being something that they can just flip the switch on and then they're better. But that's not possible, as we've seen due to all the factors that Bethany has talked about. It's something that takes a long time. And we're going to discuss this more here in a little while when we talk about the role that the church will take in helping people. But just recognize that it's something that we have to walk with them about. And we'll talk about that a little more.
Yeah, and I'd like to have Clinton bring up a screen here, identifying about word choices and stigma. Bethany, you were talking about stigma and shame and how that can often, our word choices, and I will tell you, changing what words you use can be difficult, but it also helps us create an environment that supports recovery and treatment. Nate or Bethany, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, actually, I think that you make a good point there, because the word choices that we use in church are sometimes something that we don't think about. You know, we have our own belief systems and about addiction. And so those words that we use come to the forefront without us even knowing that we're saying them. So, I mean, oftentimes people say things like, you know, you can just stop, or I just don't understand why they keep doing the things that they're doing. If they wanted to quit, they would. You know, and it's that kind of language and stigma associated with it that really keeps people away from being able to talk about what's going on with them and what's happening. I mean, you have to recognize that a person who's active in their addiction or in their substance use disorder actually feels very alone already. And so if you're using this language, you're driving them further away from a source of potential recovery. And so I encourage everyone to think about that and be very conscientious about the words that they use. And for pastors, the words that they use in their sermons.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nate. And talking about that isolation and whatnot actually gives us a nice transition to the Hope and Recovery team, HEART. So Dennis had mentioned some of us are participating in this work. This is actually a grant-funded role from the State Department of Mental Health and Addiction that we received. And the Lutheran Foundation serves as the fiscal agent, but the people who are doing the work are from the Fort Wayne Police Department, Lutheran Social Services, where Bethany is at, and also Parkview Behavioral Health. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone from Parkview here with us today. But Jeremy, let's go ahead and talk about what HEART is. How does all of this work? Tell me about it.
Okay. Well, HEART started out about a year ago. We got this thing kind of moving along, and we weren't really sure the best way to approach it, especially for the law enforcement side of it, because people, the clients we talk to can sometimes be a little nervous around the police. So a normal day for us goes, we will go and look up overdoses, EMS runs, anything to do with the addiction aspect or the overdose aspect. And then we will go along with Parkview, who's we've all taken peer recovery, but with the peers, and we'll go out and actually go to these houses door to door, or the places where they've overdosed, and try to make contact with these people. Once we get there, since we're kind of cold calling them and showing up just kind of unannounced, we'll go in there and kind of give this 2-minute elevator speech about why we're here and what we're doing. I call us when I say I call us that we're kind of a concierge of services. We're not forcing anything on them. We're not trying to talk them into doing something they don't want to do. We're just here to provide information, Narcan, and kind of help them get started on their road to recovery.
Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit about why you do this work? Because obviously you're a police officer. Typically we think of cops, drugs. You're there to handcuffs and take them to jail.
Right. So I've been actually just turned about a week ago onto my 20th year in law enforcement, and I've been in vice and narcotics for about 10 years. And it's over the last 10 years, I've seen the trends of drugs and things come and go, and things who stuck. So, heroin came kind of rolling into the scene quite heavy, and we really started seeing a problem. One, that, used needles are felonies. fentanyl takes very, very little for people to overdose. So very quickly we realized that people were really overdosing faster than we could really even lock them up. We've learned very, very quickly that we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of the problem when it comes to the people that are actually using. There's always a spot in our jails for people who are dealing, and we will gladly continue to take the dealers, but we were trying to change it up. I can't tell you how many times before this program was even in that I would have someone that would overdose, go make the scene, they'd have a needle in their arm still, and they were so bad that they would have to go to the hospital and be admitted into the ER. So I would just file a warrant for their charges in hopes that they would go to one of our court issued programs like HOPE or drug court. And many times the warrant didn't come out till after they had overdosed again. And some of them had actually, passed away from this overdose or from a second overdose. So we decided to follow up with these needle charges instead of with criminal to try to get them into treatment.
And Jeremy, talk about who is eligible for these services. Who are we looking for when you're out knocking on doors?
It's mainly people who are over 18. We've had parents call our number before and say, I'm just confused. I have a 17-year-old that's has battled with pills for the last 3 years, and I don't know what to do. So again, we go out there and kind of explain to them that it's not up to us. We don't want to pick their path. What are they comfortable with? What do they want to do? It's a complete change from what we're used to, because in my normal line of work, it's you're going to do this or else. And this aspect that we're doing now, it's nice because it's like I just need to get that conversation started. I still drive a police car. It's as unmarked as a police car can be, but you can actually see when you start talking to these people, they're really amped up because they know that that's an unmarked police car. And we get that 2-minute elevator speech out to them and let them know and reassure them. And you can actually physically see their shoulders drop because they're more comfortable with and really just surprised the police department's out here doing something besides, trying to take them to jail.
Jeremy, I know you had a good story that happened to you yesterday. Do you want to tell about a unique, doesn't happen often enough, but we're going to celebrate things when they do happen.
That's right. So when this program first started, me being in narcotics and everything else, I had kind of said, my goal right from the get-go would be 5% of people. I figured we get a lot of doors slammed in our faces and everything else. And very quickly I was surprised. I mean, we've been to hundreds of doors now and had 2 doors slammed in our faces and, not so kind words shout at us. So that was a big surprise. The other one is how many people are interested in getting help, but just don't know how to get there. So yesterday, we, like I said, we go up and we, there's a group of me and my partner, Jeff, and then usually a Parkview peer with us, and we knock on a door, and we were following up with a female 18-year-old that had overdosed the night before. And you could tell she was still physically upset. And, we kind of give our 2-minute speech, and she said, well, I was up in my bedroom thinking what I need to do now, and I don't know. And you guys have gave me options, and I'm ready to go. And we're like, okay, well, great. And she's like, let me go get my things. So we're kind of like looking at each other like, oh, she's ready to go right now. And, we're prepared for that. And we were able to get her bags loaded in, and we went off to the hospital to get her medically cleared before she started her treatment. So it's really nice to get one that's ready to go. And that's one thing that we have noticed is when they do call you or reach out to you, you have to drop what you're doing to get them going, because what they're feeling now may not be the same in 2 or 4 hours. So it's not something that we try to schedule for tomorrow. I mean, it's just whatever you're doing, cease, and we go and take care of that.
Yeah, just to let our viewers know, these services are available throughout Northeast Indiana. The door knocks happen here in Fort Wayne and Allen County. For anyone who needs these services, we do have a slide up here. This is a phone number. You can leave a voicemail, and one of the peer recovery coaches will get in touch with that person. People who are eligible for these services, this is defined by the grant. They need to either be in active use with opioids or stimulants. So that's methamphetamine, cocaine, misuse of prescription drugs as it relates to ADHD, or also misuse of opioid prescriptions as well, just to let the folks know. Bethany, let's talk to you about the role that you have with HEART there at LSSI.
So we do provide individual counseling for those who do have a substance use disorder as defined by the grant. And then I am also the supervisor to our recovery care coordinators. And our recovery care coordinators, they provide intensive case management services through a recovery lens. So not only are they helping people find housing, find jobs, stuff like that, build resume skills, whatever it might be, they're also looking and helping the client explore the bigger issues that have kept them out of recovery for so long, and then exploring how they can remain in recovery. So it's at a very intense, deep level. And something I mentioned earlier because of COVID was that with this isolation and people having the ability to hide when they've relapsed, we have now made it more of our services are in your house, and it is not to shame you by any means. It is so we can help you. If we can recognize it earlier, get you so it is a lapse, which is just a very, there's a lapse and a relapse. And a relapse is when someone goes back to them using, and a lapse is, oh my gosh, I messed up. I need to get back on track. And so by going in their homes, we're hoping that we can help clients get back on track quicker. The third thing that we do at LSSI is that we are providing family services. So we are working on a warm phone line where family members can call and speak to someone about their concerns with their loved one. I also am doing a couple individual sessions with some family members just to help them gain some clarity and understanding into the addiction.
So Bethany, I anticipate we're not thinking about who might be on the webinar today. If a pastor or a lay leader encounters somebody who needs your services from a family perspective. So first of all, just want to point out, these services are free. Thank you for the grant funding to cover those costs. How can they access your family services, those supports for the family members that are have somebody who has an active use?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can just call Lutheran Social Services. And then, so that phone number is 426-3347. And all they have to do is either ask for recovery care or Bethany, and they'll be transferred and we will get the ball rolling.
Excellent. Thank you, Bethany. So we know that we have pastors and clergy on this webinar, so we're going to bring up another question here. And it's very likely that members of congregations are living with substance use disorder themselves, or they've got family members that are doing this. So to start out, we want to understand how comfortable you are, whether it's your congregants or then also just people you work with, to programs and services that address substance use disorder. So while we're waiting for those answers to roll in, I want to look to Dennis and Nate to help us get a better understanding about the role of the church on this topic, and also how churches can help connect people to services.
Well, to start, I mean, we cannot overemphasize the importance of being aware of drug use and alcohol use in your congregation. It's often something that's silent in nature. You don't always know what's happening because, I mean, if you think about it, you may see these people one or maybe twice a week, and it's not always evident that they're grappling with something on that level. And so I would ask you to be conscientious and aware of the fact that some of the signs of, addiction are visible if you're looking for them. And maybe it behooves us to go ahead and get some further training on understanding what some of those actual signs are. But pay attention, whenever somebody says that they're going through the process, their spouse is drinking too much, or they're getting angry, or something is happening in the home, because chances are good that you're probably dealing with a number of substance use disorder issues in your congregation without even knowing it. And so it's very, very important that we do what it takes in order to suss out some of those things. Now, that being said, I think it is our tendency to kind of over spiritualize sometimes. And what we will do as clergy is say that the root of all of substance use disorder issues are related to their spiritual life. And as we heard from Bethany earlier, there is a physiological and a physiological social component to what's happening with addiction. And it's not entirely spiritual in nature. And so I encourage you to understand that whenever we're looking at somebody with a substance use disorder, it is also about helping them receive the services they need. And I think a lot of times our first response to an issue within the church is to presume that we have the ability to handle that issue. And that may not necessarily be the case. And that's okay. We don't necessarily need that speciality because there are other people out there that have that speciality. And so whenever we're talking about substance use disorder, in particular in the church, I encourage you to walk with the person, not fix the person, because that's probably outside of your purview. And so what you might want to do is try to ascertain what's going on with the individual. And if you understand that there is a substance use disorder happening, maybe go out and refer them to other people that we're talking to today in this webinar, so that they can get the help that they need from a professional who has had the training necessary to get them to the point where they can start or remain in their recovery. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we stop dealing with them at that point. Clergy's role is to do what we can to help them understand, particularly that their sins are forgiven and that they can continue to remain in the church, that we can help them deal with these issues of guilt through things like absolution and confession, and that we can help them understand that they are still accepted by their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And that's a big deal because, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes people with substance use disorder feel alone. They feel disconnected and they feel like nobody can help them. But our role is to help them feel that connection as well, and to know that their church family hasn't abandoned them simply because they have this medical condition. Our job is to help them feel accepted, to help them know that they are welcome within the church. And as they go throughout their problem, we are there with them, walking with them and helping them to do what is necessary so that they can understand that they are loved and accepted anyway. And so that's,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, Dennis, I know you work with a lot of pastors in your role there at the Lutheran Foundation. What do you hear from pastors, or what do you wish pastors knew about this?
As I hear Nate talk about this, and I think about the years that I have pastored congregations, I can think of 3 people at least in one of the congregations I previously pastored who I learned later after I left the congregation that they were actively involved in substance use. And I didn't know what to look for. I didn't realize that at the time. And it wasn't until I've gotten into some of these conversations over the last few years that any of this even rose to the level of awareness for me. So I would strongly echo what Nate said. I think we just need to have awareness of the fact that this is a reality. To say that every pastor has somebody in their congregation who is actively using, that may or may not be the case, but I would imagine the majority are. The majority of congregations, there is somebody actively using. And so for me as a pastor, just to understand some of that, to understand that this isn't something that they should be shamed about. This doesn't make them a bad person. God's unconditional love is just as available to them, should be shared with them as with anybody else. Rachel, you and I have talked about this before, but I just have to share this story because it was so eye-opening for me. We heard a couple of years ago of a young adult in our community here who this particular person grew up in the Lutheran community, grew up at a Lutheran church in town. Kind of back and forth a little bit as they got older, but they were actively attending a Lutheran church when her children were young. but she was actively using at that time. And she told us the story that one Christmas Eve, she was sitting in church watching her children sing in a Christmas Eve service. They finished singing. She left, went outside to the parking lot for a deal with her drug dealer, came back inside the church and finished the service. And when she told us that story, I thought, oh my gosh, if we think that this isn't happening in our congregations, we probably need to realize the reality is that it is taking place. And so just to be aware of that, what are some of the signs, as Nate talked about? Know what some of the resources are in the community, and know that for that person, as well as for their family members, as a pastor, I'm there to walk alongside of them. And also to do some education with the rest of the congregation, so that as congregation members learn about this, they're not pointing fingers and shaming, but we're loving, we're supporting, we're caring for, encouraging, praying for, walking alongside.
That's such a powerful story, Dennis. And I think it also just helps to illuminate for us what is happening within our individual lives, and also recognizing. So sometimes it may be actual members of the church, sometimes it's family members of congregants. So that's interesting. So as we take a look at this, when we see how people feel comfortable, 74% said that they were very comfortable in referring folks out and getting them to those services. I appreciate the 21% said they feel more comfortable because of this webinar. So thank you for participating, and we hope we've provided some useful information. Let's keep going though with this, about talking about some of the available resources, because even for those who feel comfortable, no reason not to have a reminder on this. So in addition to HEART, what are some available services? Bethany, I'm going to give you an opportunity to start on this one.
Yeah, so here in Fort Wayne, obviously there's the HEART team and LSSI. It's really going to be dependent on someone's level of use, and whether or not they're going to need inpatient, to go to the hospital first to detox. We have had some great places come out, Fort Wayne Recovery, Avenues, and they're just phenomenal to get people in who have high needs and who need, that high level of care. There is also a SAMHSA published not an article, but just a little statement, and it's called Virtual Recovery Resources. And it has a host of virtual recovery meetings, far greater than NAAA, Celebrate Recovery. And, with these COVID restrictions happening again, virtual is going to be where it's at. And so I encourage everyone to check out that list.
Excellent. Thanks, Bethany. So also what we know is that there are faith-based providers, and then there are, we might call non-faith-based or secular. So should pastors be concerned if somebody's insurance doesn't cover a faith-based provider? What is a faith-based provider inherently better, or what should they do in that situation?
I don't think that there should be any concern if we can't get into a faith-based provider. The reason behind that is because just because my background isn't specifically in Christian counseling or biblical counseling, I do have faith in God. I love God. I don't have that kind of background. I am a mental health counselor. However, I do work for an organization whose mission is to help and love and support people through the love of Jesus Christ. And so really what I encourage people to do is interview a therapist. Go to that initial session and interview them and ask, do you believe? Can you talk to God? Can you bring up God? Can you pray with me? If that is something that's important, ask them. And if they're not making the cut, try someone else, because it is going to be so important that a counselor has the skills to help with the addiction, but then also can give you that spiritual, that spiritual part if that's what you're looking for.
Dennis or Nate, I think you also are just well equipped, Nate, especially from you having been on both sides of this. What are your thoughts to help clergy? And
Well,
lay
yeah,
leaders?
I think that it's important that we recognize that we can receive good counseling, even if it's not faith-based. We understand as Lutherans the concept of blessing through your vocation. And sometimes people bless through their vocation and they work as a mask of Christ, even if they are, in fact, a non believer. And that's because they're still doing good things that help others. And so I would encourage people who are wrestling with that question to just consider the fact that you still go to the doctor and you are still blessed through that vocation and you're not sure what your doctor may believe. The same thing is true. Whenever I was dealing with clients, they would sometimes want to talk to a specific counselor that usually had some past drug and alcohol experience. But I would tell them, in the case of dealing with somebody that didn't, you're trying to learn how to be sober. So maybe you should talk to somebody who has had experience being sober. And I think the same thing is true here. We don't need faith-based counseling all the time because those people have expertise and they can utilize that expertise.
We are getting some excellent questions. So first of all, somebody asked me, don't forget to mention Living Free Recovery and Recovery Church. So thus I have made that shout out at their request. Here's what I think is interesting. I think it ties back in some ways to the moral function versus disease model. How does tough love look like and sound like when a pastor is interacting with someone who has substance abuse disorder? So think about what does it.
Okay. Well, tough love can sound like what we're trying to do is tell them, hey, here's what you need to do, right? We can be very firm with them and assertive with them. And there's nothing wrong with being assertive about the need for somebody to enter treatment. And so if that's the direction they're approaching it from, I can agree with that. But it is about the idea of making sure that you're through the proper resources. So tough a lot of different ways, but generally speaking, if you're saying, I want to encourage them and be assertive about telling them they need treatment, that's fine.
Thank you, Nate. Another great question that we had come in, and we hinted at it, and we've got some time to talk about it, is wanting to know what pastors and lay leaders should know about what to be aware of. Most people probably know from family members being in addiction, but what about people who have no awareness? So we hinted at symptoms, but we didn't really talk about that. We've got some time. So I think that what should people be looking for on that end?
Well, Bethany, I think you can help me kind of talk about this a little bit. It's tough to say, a top 10 list of symptoms, especially whenever you're seeing somebody who so irregularly. But really, whenever somebody comes to you and says, my family member, this person that I'm dealing with is having a problem, that should be a red flag. Because sometimes you'll go and talk to that person afterward and they'll say, oh, no. They misunderstood, they didn't understand, and they'll have lots of rationalizations and reasons why what they did may have been okay. But I still think you should pay attention to that, because if somebody else thinks it's significant enough to bring up to you, then maybe that is the source of an issue. What would you say, Bethany?
I agree with that. I completely agree with that. I also think just knowing some common physical things to look out for, odor, red eyes, issues with skin, dilated eyes, pupils, pupils being large, just some of the physical symptoms. But one of the biggest things I really look out for is an inconsistent behavior. So when I have clients who are consistently attending counseling and then all of a sudden they start missing, arriving late, stuff like that, that is my biggest red flag. Something's going on here. And I just get to a point where I'm like, are you using, or what's going on? Have you relapsed? Let's talk this out. I just ask very, very forward. I'm very, very forward about it.
And so, just to piggyback onto that, sudden behavioral changes, sudden, 90-degree changes that seem very uncharacteristic of their behavior or personality might be indicative of that as well.
Let's spend a moment also then talking about alcohol use disorder. So that's not part of our grant with Heart, But obviously that's one. So at what point, I mean, many of us consume alcohol, we consume it responsibly, but we're in highly stressful times. We're heading into holidays. We're still in the pandemic, economic stressors, things like that. What are some things for people to be thinking about in terms of their own alcohol use or identifying somebody who looks like those patterns could be becoming problematic?
Well, I mean, one of the major things is just the fact of physiological addiction, right? Meaning that you cannot actually not use unless you have, some kind of negative physiological response. So that's part of it. But another thing is, what is your reaction whenever you aren't able to use? If it's a situation where you're drinking on a regular basis and for one reason or another you're denied the access or the ability to drink, you become irritable, you become angry. Is that a situation where that occurs? And the last criteria that I'm aware of, and Bethany, again, you can help me with this, is that if you do have access to alcohol, do you use all of it? Is it something that you can't stop yourself from finishing? And those are three criteria of substance use disorder that I'm aware of that we should all be concerned about. If those things are present, you might want to be looking for some help.
I have nothing to add with that. I am in complete agreement. The only thing that's kind of off of that is that if someone does come to you who has alcohol use disorder, encourage them to go to the hospital to detox. Alcohol can cause seizures and withdrawal can kill a person. And so I never recommend just doing it at home.
Nope.
Excellent advice, Bethany. A couple other questions I want to touch on. So somebody asked, how do we help kids who confess their parents are users?
Well, I think obviously whenever we're talking, how do we help kids? Let me make sure I understood the question. How do we help kids who confess their parents are users? Is that correct?
Yeah, so what they're saying is the kid is saying mom or dad is using. What's the intervention? How do we assist on that? So we've got two factors, the child and the parents.
Well, I mean, in a pastoral office, I mean, you really have to be careful about, what you do with the confession of someone. And so if a child comes to you and says, my parent is using, then that's within the seal of confession. And so in that particular instance, unless it's something where we're talking about, this is life threatening, they're committing a crime, then really that's something that you have to keep to yourself. That doesn't mean that you probably can't, hint around to the parent and talk to them and check in to see how they're doing and build on that. But I mean, you can't use that as actionable evidence, as it were. Would you agree with that, Dennis?
Yes, I do think it, and you pointed to this, I do think it heightens our awareness of those parents, not to look at them negatively, but to exercise appropriate pastoral concern. And there are things that happen among our congregation members that should heighten a pastor's awareness of concern for their members, their congregants. And while I might not be able to say, hey, your child told me this, I certainly want to spend some time with them. I want to get to know them a little better than maybe I have. I want to ask some specific questions, not to be overly overt about it, but it should just heighten my awareness as their pastor.
Excellent points. And then so the final question we have here before we close out today is about virtual therapy. And so do we know of anybody who offers virtual therapy or online therapy in the area? So Bethany, I'm going to toss that over to you.
We do. Actually, I think most places do at this point. I know some here in Fort Wayne haven't even gone back to in person. And so, yeah, there's a lot of available telehealth right now. I think if you just call around or if you're at a place that is already having it, that you can just ask if they offer telehealth and they'll be able to tell you right away.
Excellent. Well, you know what? I am going to, Clinton, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the Heart Hotline, the LookUp Indiana information, remedylive, of course, thank you for hosting us today. So let's go ahead and bring those up, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Dennis and Clinton to close us out. So thank you for all of you who have been part of this. And thank you to our panelists for bringing their good insights to helping us understand these important issues.
Rachel, thank you for moderating this incredible conversation. It's rare for me in the studio to sit and watch something that I'm a part of like this, but thank you so much for all of the different voices, the agencies, the expertise, the wisdom from a perspective of the bride of Christ going into these messy areas of our world and offering hope and help. Thank you to all of you that were a part of this discussion. And for those of you watching as well, we want to wrap up with some resources. Dennis, I'm going to pop up on the screen some of the faith-based resources that we have available at LookUp Indiana. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? These are really great resources that we've put on the website regarding substance use.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that. Thank you, Clinton. So lookupindiana.org is a resource for people looking for different providers as well as information. But there on that front page, there is a button, there's a tab for faith resources, and there's a variety of things that are covered there. These are for lay people, these are for clergy, these are for ministry leaders. They're resources there for somebody who's just dealing with this because a family member's struggling with that. So please take time to look at that, as well as some other information on lookupindiana.org. The button for worth the effort and you're worth it. Some great information there for youth related to substance use and for parents related to education that they would want to be aware of because of what their children may be dealing with.
Well, thank you for that, Dennis. I do want to affirm with what we do here at Remedy Live and our Get Schooled tours and working with thousands of students in our area. Parents, if you're watching, be part of this conversation. The Worth the Effort campaign that Dennis referred to, that is such an important initiative, and it really is going to take all of us as we talk about the issues of addiction. Today we've had some incredible voices representing the church and how we as the body of Christ need to be extending this hope, this light, this love to our culture, to our society, to our neighbors, to people. And so I'm so grateful. I do want to let you know as we wind down here that we are really thankful that next month we have yet another incredible LookUp education series, and this is so appropriate, talking about the holiday blues, hoping and coping in the difficult days. Registration is now open for that on the LookUp website, and that's December the 10th from 10 to 11 a.m. Some great presenters, Janet Altmeyer and Dr. Terry Anderson, are going to be with us for this, and hopefully we're back in the studio and Dennis and I can host them and be able to have you join us through some interactive polling and doing what we're doing here through the LookUp education series. I want to make sure we end our time for like usual, where we give you a chance to be able to evaluate how things went today. We want to make sure that we're always improving and taking your feedback into consideration as to how we can continue to do better. And I asked you just before that in the polling whether there might be some future topics you want us to address. We want to continue to expand the reach and what we're doing to offer hope and help to our area, our region, and so please let us know how we can do that. And as I end our time together, Dennis, I want to give you a chance to make some final comments, some thank yous, and send us out before I finish up with these final evaluation questions to the polling and the interaction that we have there.
I want to thank again the panelists who are a part of this. You know, one of the things that has been such a privilege in my role here at the Lutheran Foundation is just getting to know various different people in the community and what you guys are doing. If it wasn't for the work here, I would have no idea probably of what the Heart Team's all about, and to hear, you know, some of the experiences that Jeremy has, and Bethany, what you bring to that, and Rachel, all the work that you do with this. And I had the opportunity to get to know Nate a little bit as a vicar at St. Peter's and a seminary student. So this is just so humbling, and I am so thankful for the people that God has put in my life and put in this community to address some of this. So thank you again for our panelists. Clinton, always great working with you.
Thank you, Dennis. Again, good to be with you. Sad to not be physically with you, but thank you for letting us continue to partner even as we do this via Zoom. I just want to end on one final note, the power of story. It's so important for us here at Remedy Live. And we had the privilege of producing a story this last year with a young man named Nate. And I'm just going to pop that up on the screen, that if you would at some point want to watch that on our website, it's at remedylive.com/Nathan. A great story of a young man who traversed addiction. It talks candidly about the way it affected his family, the way it affected his faith, and then how his recovery also now has made an impact on the way that he serves and helps others. So check that out if it could be of value to you later on. Again, remedylive.com/Nathan. I'm also going to end our time with just giving you a chance again to be mindful of our Wired experiences and how we want to serve you. But on behalf of the Lutheran Foundation, on Remedy Live, thank you so much for your time today and for participating in this important event. We'll see you again soon.
1 in 5 Americans struggle with mental illness in the United States. And for many of them, they struggle in secret, surrounded by friends, family members, and people they work with each and every day. The Wired Experience is a 1-hour program, provided virtually or in person, that engages adults in the importance of answering a very important question. How are you? Really? Through the interactive polling software that Remedy Live created, we get people talking. The Wired Experience helps organizations big and small talk about the tough issues of secret struggle, provide important information about mental health and the network of care, and get a data snapshot of the trends within the organization so further resources can be provided to serve their people. Thanks to courageous leaders partnering with the Wired podcast, the Wired Experience is serving organizations and making a difference in the conversation around mental health. Together, we can see the mental health stigma lowered and people moved from their secret struggle and into the freedom offered through the network of care.